Eid Al Adha. The scent of enlightenment. A gentle reminder that air, water, and fire indeed are life-giving essences. Appreciate the intersection of time and luxury. Magnify your essence. Tarife Atar.
Assalamu alaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh, everybody. Eid Mubarak, Eid Al Adha Mubarak. I just want to make sure I get that out, man. We have such a beautiful day today. Shout out to Masjid Muhammad, did an extremely beautiful function out at Kenilworth Track in Northeast DC off of 44th Avenue. I don't want to say just the diversity of people. I just want to say the diversity of thankfulness and gratefulness. People were just all over the place, enjoying themselves. The kids came out. I think they even got into some pickleball. Rick, sorry, brother, you probably missed it. Just that whole idea. And I just want to give a shout out to everybody that sent me a text or WhatsApp, just saying Eid Mubarak. And for those I haven't gotten back to, Eid Mubarak to you. And we're going to talk a little bit about that. And I'm going to actually mix it in. This probably won't be a full show today, because I want people to go ahead and enjoy their families on this beautiful holiday. But I had a couple things happen, and I'm going to talk about them today. One was, of course, Eid, but yesterday I had a chance to go to the National Museum of African American History. And if you have not been to DC to see this establishment, and I don't even want to say it's an establishment. I mean, the way it's laid out, the understanding that people come there with some aspect of, one, getting information, two, trying to heal, it was transformative. Taking family there, watching other families go through this process of understanding. We are very adept these days at taking a history at a very, very surface level. And I want to applaud the museum. I want to applaud all the people who invested in the museum. And I don't mean just the people who put in heavy money, Oprah Winfrey, all that. I don't want to do that. I do want to thank them, but I also want to thank the people who bring their kids and the elders to this establishment here in Washington, D.C. to let us engage, but also understand. And I don't know if you understand how cathartic it is when you can look at aspects of history and go, I was in that, that phase. I was in the 80s. I was in the 90s. I was in the 70s. And at the same time, be able to go to the part, which is the bottom part of the museum, which is essentially slavery and freedom. I find that it's liberating, particularly the next day being Eid, which is today, that I had some thoughts, I had some inspiration coming out of this process as we go through all the challenges that we see tomorrow. Shout out, I'll be doing an event at the ShOUT Community Center tomorrow, Howard University. If you're in the area, come on through, drop through. ShOUT Community has been around for years. It's historic. You're talking about Masjid Muhammad. You're talking about Howard Theater. You're talking about Ben's Chili Bowl, Lincoln Theater. Just a cornucopia of black intellectual power and culture and arts in the Washington D.C. area. They have it in other places, but that area is just known for it. Just so you know, right off the Florida Avenue and Rhode Island Avenue. So, listen, we're going to take a break. We're going to come back and we're going to get back into our show, talking about Eid, also talking about my visit to the National African American Museum in Washington D.C. Okay, don't you move. We'll be right back. Sorry about that. I guess I should let you know that I'm working back in the day. Shout out to Sister Tana. She won't be with us today. Celebrating with her family, celebrating Eid. And anybody else that tuned in today, thank you so much because you could have been a lot of places. Let me get right into our section. I want to give a shout out to Sister Reed. Sister Reed, hope you're doing well. Peace and blessings to you during this holiday, my dear sister, as well as your husband Derek and your young warrior Jawan. And Sister Reed, we really, really appreciate it. So let me just take a moment. When we had COVID and through the last couple of just Ramadan, Sister has always been there to make sure that I eat. Sometimes I am not good at breaking my fast effectively. Sometimes I choose it, but this sister has been there as a neighbor and as a friend and as a sister, as a family member, making sure that I do the right things to keep going. And I just want to celebrate you while I have a chance. I want to give a shout out Big Brother Bilal Salahuddin. I hope you and Sister Ree are not cooking down in Houston. I hope you're doing okay. I hope you're blessed. Eid Mubarak to you and your queen, Sister Sonia, and the Salahuddin family. That's what we want to get to. We want to make sure that we shout out the Salahuddin family. That's extremely, extremely important. You know what? We're going to give a shout out to our regular crew too. I'm going to give a shout out to Brother Altaf Rashid, our dear brother who comes out and makes sure that he's here today. Well, he's not here today. This is a holiday, and I do encourage people to spend time with their families during the holidays. I mean, it's really important. And this Eid is interesting because, when we had Eid al-Fitr, it was fasting, it was the communal thing. Everyone is fasting all over the world. And this one is different. The Eid here is a celebration of the Hajj, a celebration of Prophet Ibrahim's willingness to sacrifice his son in the belief and the sustainability of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And I think it's really, really important because we have so many things that seem to be pulling, if you will, pulling out our attention. We have politics. We have the Trump issues. We recently had a submarine issue that imploded at the bottom of the sea, which superseded the tragedy that happened in the Greek waters of a ship that capsized. And I think they lost at least 200 people were lost. And we have not talked about that the way we should have. I should have been more on it, but I'm going to talk about it. And I'm going to ask that we make the wall for those who were lost at sea. These are immigrants who are trying to find a better way of life, but it wasn't really followed. Between classified documents and a submarine with a bunch of rich people on it, we dropped the ball. So I want to make sure that we send out duas and comfort. And to the people in the submarine, yes, but there's a large portion of people that really didn't get news coverage. Former President Barack Obama brought that up during one of his talks, and I thought it was entirely appropriate. But it also says that we need to learn, if you will, or it's advisable, if you will, to learn the things or lend ourselves to things that have to do with growing our community. It seems that we lend ourselves to politics, and it seems we lend ourselves to finance and things like that. We need to be, if at all possible, a little bit myopic, understanding the value of our community around us. While we have the shout out show, the shout out show is a lot of things. The shout out show is a community. Though we do it once a week, it is a communal once a week. Whether I have people on here or not, whether it doesn't matter, because I found that people watch the shout out show once we get off. People from DC to Houston to Dallas to Australia to the Philippines to Indonesia, they watch the shout out show. And what does that say? It says in some regards, particularly in this spirit of Eid, that we have to be driven by something that's bigger than us. The whole aspect of the story of Hajj is two things. One, a sacrifice of Prophet Ibrahim's son, one. But two, it is the ordering of the house. That we order the house. This is the house of God that we're talking about. This is not a regular house. It's not your house. It means that we're part of a larger tradition, wherever you come from. The beautiful thing about Hajj, going back to when Malcolm X made Hajj, that he goes to Hajj and he understands that there's an explanation of life that's waiting on him. When I say there's an explanation of life that's waiting on him, it means that we're always in our little cubby holes and we're tied to our perspectives in terms of, this person or that person or the way the government works. But it's interesting that when you get away from that and you pare down the circumstances around you, you willingly remove yourself from the circumstances around you, that you are, in many regards, a holder of truth. One of the talks I'm going to give probably next week is understanding the benefits of Haq. Haq is Arabic for truth. In the religious tradition, in Islam, we define our Lord by his characteristics. Now, there are 99 names of Allah, but there are a ton of other names we don't know. I would gather to say that one of the names that maybe we don't know, we don't use, is that he is the protector of truth. Now, some people say, well, it's this kind of truth, that kind of truth. No, there is something that needs to be said about protecting truth. In our graves, when we leave this earth, in our graves, we will be judged not by our sins. We'll be judged by how closely we aligned ourselves with the truth. See, the sin happens when you get away from the truth. Also, I'm so remiss. I want to give a shout out to the Chappelle Jones family. We had a wonderful time in Yellow Springs. Brother Nassim Chappelle and his wife Julie, congratulations on your recent nuptials. It was a wonderful time. Thank you for including me. But here's the thing, getting back to our talk. And this is going to spill over to the talk about the museum. The one thing that's beautiful about Eid Al Adha is Eid Al Adha is something that is, I want to say, reflective of all the Abrahamic religious traditions, Judaism, Christianity, and Islam. That this is something that we all agree upon, that we've tied, if you will, we've tied our camel to this thing, and it's very, very important that over and over and over and over, we begin to see that truth will separate, truth will separate you from the BS, if you will. I had a great analogy about education years ago, and We said there's two schools that you want to send. It's two schools in terms of your children, the welfare of your children. So there's one school, it's high performing, it's it's high performing, great teachers, well funded, extremely good resources, strong curriculum. Parents are fighting to get their kids into this school, but check this out. Teachers are fighting to get in and be educators at this school. You have that, and then you have what's left. It's very much the same about the truth. So this Eid, I really, really, really felt strongly about beginning to refine my process of discernment about what kind of information that I'm taking in. Because as much as we talk about mental health, we have to talk about what we line ourselves with in terms of mental acuity. Things that we allow to come into our space, that we allow to occupy our space. We talked about this as cognitive surplus in the past. Because if you think about it, we only have so much time in a day to really address the things that are important to us. And if you don't use that time wisely, it doesn't necessarily roll over and you get to do it again. You lose that time. That's the truth. That's the hawk. That being said, I think it's even more important that we begin to understand, and this is clearly something I'm working on. We begin to understand that there are things that are out there that move us from the truth, that frame themselves. I always look at some aspects of mental health that the further and further people get removed from the truth, they call it reality. But the further and further people get removed from the truth, it's a pathway to madness. It's an absolute pathway to madness. And we can talk about all the clinical and psychological aspects of it. But when you tell a lie, you still have a redemptive understanding that you can tell the truth. But when you live the lie, it's even more difficult. All the prophets, all the prophets, from Adam to Ibrahim to Jesus, Prophet Muhammad, peace and blessings be upon him, may Allah be pleased with all of them, faced a situation and scenario in their individual times whereby the truth was not valued, whereby you can give people the truth and they wouldn't take it. You can tell people 1 and 1 is 2. They say, no, 1 and 1 is 18. And if you have enough people to say that it's 18, then that becomes the truth. This was the pathway for martyrdom. That enough people were against the truth, that the truth didn't matter. We live in those times now. And I would be circumspect to not say that we created those conditions. We've created some conditions whereby we're not necessarily looking at what people are doing and saying, and we're not challenging it. One of the things that I felt so strongly about, and I had a lot of emotions when I went to the museum yesterday. One of the things that really, really struck a deep emotion in me was that the people who suffered the most, hear me now, the people who suffered the most had an acute awareness of history. The people who went through the most oppression had an eclectic engagement with history. And the more and more we get sophisticated, the further we move away from history. See, what's important about Eid Al Adha is Eid Al Adha represents history. So we have pilgrims that are on Mount Arafat, and some of us fasted yesterday. Alhamdulillah. Some of us didn't. Some of us had intention to fast. That Eid Al Adha, the idea of intention, listen to me. If you've already made Hajj, some of you have made Hajj before. And alhamdulillah, inshallah, I'll get to go too. But if you understand the scope of Hajj, Hajj is a timeline. It doesn't happen happenstance. That your intention begins with La ilaha illallah, and you understand that carries all the way through. That to get to Arafat, that to make Tawaf around the Kaaba is not a mistake. That history has chosen you. There are people I know and love who never had an opportunity to go to Hajj, whether it be financial, whether it be health related. Some of them were just too old and they made good intentions. But even still, understand that Hajj is a historical tradition. I don't know, brothers and sisters, of how many other religious traditions that are out there that are based on this one thing, a universal truth. A universal truth that draws people from all over the world, whether it be from the UK, the US, Africa, Canada. There are believers all over the world that understand the truth of Hajj, not just as a pillar of faith, it's the truth of faith. And as you begin to go further and further, I think, and I enjoy this idea, if you will, that Hajj is we want to align ourselves with the truth. And that goes to the fact that we do have to engage discernment. We do have to get to a point where we're willing to sacrifice things, whether it be time on our phone, whether it be conversation we don't need, whether it be unnecessary relationships. Even for me, I found over the years that during Ramadan, and particularly during Eid Al Adha, I don't like to perform much. I literally don't like to perform much, because my mind is in a different place. My mind is at another level of gratitude, but even more so, it pulls me closer to the truth. When you see people in their garbs and their ikrams and making tawaf, you can put yourself in that picture. And it's a very truthful picture because it's about so much about intention, but you can live vicariously through people because every Hajj that's made individually, yearly, throughout the history of Islam has been a historical event. Much the same as a museum, the 1 or 2 million people who come from Hajj, each of them has a universal story, but each of them has a very, very unique story of how they got there. You know, one of the things I love about the Eid, which maybe we should talk about, is just, can we celebrate motivation? Can we celebrate inspiration? Our title of our show is just in the nick of time. Eid is here. Why did I make that title? Because it's not a Muslim title. No, Eid is not a Muslim title. It is Muslim celebration, but it's a universal understanding that each and every one of us have to face our own truth. How religious we are, how devoted we are, how disciplined we are, how we with finances. It is a calling to the truth. You know, the story of Abraham and his son, when Allah calls on him to sacrifice his son, he's hesitant. But his son lives the truth and goes, Allah said, do it, let's get to it. Now, the story that, he doesn't sacrifice his son. He sends him, an animal to sacrifice. But I think the thing that I don't think anybody misses is, what's our level of truth? Can you get to that level of truth? Can we face some of the things that are extremely difficult? And I mean, when I mean face, I mean maturely, not weakly. Stand up and show up. And if that's a thing, if you will, I'm like, if that's the thing, it's like, why don't we celebrate it more? Because when I talk about the museum at the break, I want everybody to understand that this museum is not it is not a mistake. And it's something that I have to say about the museum, and it's not controversial or anything, but I felt like they should have a space, if you will, for black religion and black church. It was very small. It was very small. they dispersed it around, but I felt like there was continuity between Africans who came with Islam and Africans who were given Christianity. I felt like that was a powerful misnomer to address, if you will, the idea of black church. There should be a section just called Black Church. All right, I'm going to take a quick break. We're going to come back and we're going to talk about this thing. Don't you guys move. We appreciate you. Assalamu alaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh. Assalamu alaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh, everybody. I'm comedian Preacher Moss. I hope you're having a blessed Ramadan. Listen, I just want to take a couple of minutes of your time to talk about Olive Branch Muslim Family Services. You know, Olive Branch Muslim Family Services represents a lot in the city of Houston. You have a lot of relief organizations throughout the country, throughout the state, but I have to say Olive Branch Muslim Family Services is one for the home team of the city of Houston. Listen, let me tell you about myself. I've always lived this idea that I'm always going to have more blessings than I'm going to have problems. And in that space, I've been able to understand that the blessings sometimes mean I can be a blessing in somebody else's life, much the same with Olive Branch Muslim Family Services. Years ago, maybe 2 years ago, we had a video and it asked the profound question, imagine if it wasn't an olive branch. Not so much the organization, but the absence of compassion and mercy. Imagine if there wasn't an olive branch. Not so much a question, but a reminder of prophetic tradition that all of our prophets who have come came to advocate for the poor and uplift the suffering. Imagine if there wasn't an olive branch. Thinking about that. OBMFS. I changed the letters from Olive Branch Muslim Family Services and dug a little deeper, thinking about that prophetic tradition. So Olive Branch Muslim Family Services is really Olive Branch's mission is family success. We need your help. While you're writing out that check, brothers and sisters, think about that. What's a world without compassion? What's good music without good instruments? What's a president that's distrustful and not honest? Okay, let me get back focused. In any event, imagine if there wasn't an olive branch. Let me remind you.
We just need help.
Imagine if there wasn't an olive branch. Muslim Family Services at your command. The people who help people have to say, we need your donations, don't delay. We all have struggles from time to time. A leader's dedicated is what you find. Before another person sheds a tear, support Olive Branch, you don't have to fear. Olive Branch Muslim Family Services. Action you can see, compassion you can feel. Sing it with me. Ooh. Ooh. All right, we're back. Shout out to Olive Branch Muslim Family Services in the city of Houston, doing great work. I just want to finish one idea before I get to this museum, and work with me because I'm dealing with one a bit of an academic understanding of the museum. Two, I'm also dealing with an emotional aspect of the museum. And three, I'm also trying to talk to you in terms of the community spirit of the museum. So let me begin with this. The idea of a National African American Museum is not new. We were able to see it realized in the last couple of years, but the precedent had been thrown down years ago. And it comes with the understanding that throughout history, the aspect of greatness, the aspect of struggle, the aspect of success, the aspect of triumph, the aspect of failure, the aspect of evolution and growth, in terms of the African American community, has always been, in many regards, attempted to be muted. That if you let this happen, people will take over your narrative. This museum secures the fact that that narrative can never be taken over. At the time I walked to the museum, Houghton Mifflin, which provides most of the textbooks for the United States, following the lead of Texas, have tried to reframe slaves as unskilled workers, not forced labor, not people dragged and taken from their country, not people who are oppressed, not people who are denied voting rights, basic human rights, equality, but unskilled workers. And in the narrative, it's switched around that if they weren't bought from Africa, they would still be unskilled. That the white man, the European, is the savior of the African American spirit and the evolver, if you will, the evolver of our success, the evolver of our spiritual acuity, the evolver of our relationship with God, whether it's God, Allah, Jesus, whoever. Somehow white supremacy and white exceptionalism has entered into everything we do. And this particular museum, stands at the forefront to make sure that this is not happening. I can tell you that this museum is probably one of the most significant things that's happened in the last 56 years in context of African American narrative. And this is why. When you go to the museum, you don't just see black people. You don't see young black people. You see all shades and all ages of black people. But you also see white people. You also see Asians. You also see Latinos. And even in one part of the museum, a small part is dedicated to the other cultures that were inspired by African American leadership and power movements, mainly Native Americans and Latinos. So say, Preach, what are you saying? When you go to the museum, it lends you to an experience that you may not be ready for. That if your heart is not attached to an open spirit, if your heart is hardened, you can't go in this section of the museum. You will be diametrically opposed to this part of the museum. When you go to the museum, you go down an elevator, escalator, and then you go down to an elevator. And you take it to the bottom of the museum, and that part of the museum is labeled Slavery and Freedom. Slavery and Freedom. The first display is about the rich communities and kingdoms of Ghana, reminding people that there was success before white supremacy, European exceptionalism, that there was success before then. Leading me to understand clearly there's more and more success. That intuitively, if you look at the scope, the narrative of African American presence here in the United States, let's just say African presence, because I've learned that from the museum too. You see, the people that came to America were African. They were not American. They were African. And in that phrase, the African spirit is indomitable. That it can't be beat. It's never been defeated. That it takes on only things that make it better or extends, if you will, its virility. Something that extends, if you will, its strength, its power. It extends, if you will, its presence. That's the only thing America has ever done for the African who came to the United States. And if you have to really, really dig into it, and I have, when you begin to understand that America was not the beginning of slavery. Europe was the beginning of slavery. America just perfected it. That is, you go through Spain, the UK, the Netherlands, understand that the prototypes to create a slave, the prototypes in the behavior to create oppressive environments to break an African is extensive. Even more so. Simply the idea that I must break this person physically and break them spiritually and emotionally and mentally, that's a lot of levels. And if I'm a better man, I'm going to say you're not going to break all those levels. Emotionally, spiritually, physically, you're not going to break all those levels. And as we begin to understand continuity, because this is important when you talk about slavery to freedom, that whole basement area, the bottom of the museum, walks you through aspects of freedom and liberation that we don't talk about. We talked about slavery on a past show, and I thought what was interesting is when I read some of the books about former slaves, they were they were treated cruelly, inhumanely. Just the idea that you were property, that does it for me. But they were social entities. They were social entities who understood the importance of engagement and building community. You have to understand, they didn't build community according to what the master said. They built community according to what would give them sustainability. Therefore, that sustainability will, of course, outlast slavery. That sustainability will, of course, outlast not being able to vote or fair housing, all of these things. It outlasted everything that has been brought to the African American community in terms of health, finance, law, religion. This museum, if you will, is amazing because it reminds you that there are spirits that came before Frederick Douglass and spirits that came before Sojourner Truth and spirits that came before Nat Turner, John Brown. That's right, John Brown. Spirits that came before Phyllis Wheatley. Spirits that came before Toussaint. Spirits that came before Ben Mark Desi. And I think if I were to really, 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 really share some thoughts on this, as great as that museum is, the message, the overall concept of it is extremely undervalued. It's extremely undervalued. At 56 years old, I can remember what happened in 68, if you will, or 70. So I can remember a Stokely Carmichael talking about Black Power. I can remember that. I can remember Angela Davis. I can remember Eldridge Cleaver. I can remember aspects of Julian Bond, Andrew Young. Just I want to say the residue of a Martin Luther King and the residue of a Malcolm X. And I think it's interesting because this museum has caught the essence of it. There were some things I felt they could have put in. I thought, Vernon Johns should have been there because he was a pathway for Martin Luther King, but that's not the point. Everything is not going to get in there. But even for myself, people go, preach, why do you do the shout out show? I'm going to tell you guys why I do the shout out show. You know what my motto was for the shout out show? It wasn't Oprah Winfrey. It wasn't Oprah Winfrey. Just reason, there are two people or three people. One, Max Robinson. You've heard me talk about him before. Two, Carl. Oh gosh, I forget his name. He used to do the Daily Drum. But the person who appealed to me, or two people who appealed to me, other than what I said, Petey Green and Tony Brown. Petey Green and Tony Brown, who were guys that gave you a community feel to the point where nationally you can understand where they were taking you on this journey. And if I were to expand a little bit, and I'm not going to go too long. I know you guys got things to do, and I said we're going to get off early. I would encourage you, all of you, absence of religion, race, gender. I would encourage all of you to get to this museum. Don't walk, run. Get to this museum. Plan on spending a day, day and a half. It's just so much. But to go through it and read, it's going to take you probably 2 days. To just go through it and absorb it. I was kind of moving quickly. And part of that was I was aware of some of the stuff that was in the museum. I'm a historian. That's what we have to do. Love Black history. Always will. But when they started giving you details and timelines and, just things you have to understand, slavery doesn't start in the South. Slavery starts in the Chesapeake, Maryland area. And then it permeates down to the South. Just the willingness to understand how slavery jumped. How slavery could jump from, by the time they stopped transatlantic slave trade, it started out 1 point something million. By the time they stopped, it was almost 4 million. And it multiplied by 4. 4 million stories, 4 million pathways to the United States, 4 million expressions against oppression, 4 million ideologies about presence and who I am and what I want to be. 4 million people that we're never going to see again. The only way we see it is we see it in ourselves. That when you look at a Black person, you understand a story and a journey has taken place for you to get there. From the slave ship, you are the creme de la creme. The music that's brought over, it's the creme de la creme. And when you look at certain aspects of people who came over, who were intellectually beyond their masters, that the masters would marvel at them. And they remember things like the Quran. And they wrote, this is tradition that's explained in this museum in a way I can't do it justice, brother. I can't do it the kind of justice that the research has implicated needs to be done, even at a layman's level. It is thorough. It is compelling. But at the same time, inspirational and heartbreaking. Let me get to the heartbreaking part. The heartbreaking part is when you're down there at the bottom of this museum, this fabulous museum, I sit there and go, well, what happened to our willingness to fight to create new history? I'm not just throwing it out to you, I'm throwing it to myself. How have we gotten, I don't want to say lazy, but definitely pacified, that we're not out there making new history? We don't have to pick cotton, right? We don't have to pick cotton, we don't have to pick rice, we don't have to pick tobacco. And this is important because the people who had to pick rice and tobacco still develop systems whereby they can be successful at some level. See, being a slave did not mean you were a failure. Being a slave meant you were oppressed. Being a slave didn't mean you couldn't think. Being a slave just meant you were oppressed. Being a slave didn't mean that you didn't have original ideas about business, religion, family. It just meant that you were oppressed when you did it. Here we are, 2023. And this museum reminds me in some regards that we lazy as hell. That we're lazy as hell. That the people who are in the bottom and the belly of these ships, chained side by side, dealing with all kind of disease and death, could still come here and strive. The museum is also, it also is an indictment of white supremacy here in the United States. That for all the celebration of science, the celebration of technology, the celebration of finance and education, it's a grift. It reminds all of us, this museum, that America is a thief. I walked away even more circumspect about what it means to be an American. Now people go, preacher, you unpatriotic? In some regards, yes. In some regards, yes. Because America requires me to think like the rest of the Americans. Africa, Islam requires me to think about what God would like. And in that chasm, we have a lot of disagreements. We have a lot of violence. We have a lot of unresolved feelings and hurt and needed healing. But this is the thing that all of us should understand, that the National African American Museum is not there on its own. That the bottom part of slavery and freedom is interspersed at the beginning, middle, and end with Africans who, just like at Hajj said, La ilaha illallah Muhammad Rasulullah, that their creedal statements pledge them to the willingness and the pleasure of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. That in those boats, if you will, is a spirit that carried over in the worst of conditions. It's a spirit that carried over in the worst of oppression, in the worst of the South, in the worst of Jim Crow. Like I alluded to earlier, that spirit always and continues to outlast any kind of oppression that comes down the road. Thus, white supremacy at every turn, brothers and sisters, every turn has to reinvent itself. Even to the point that white supremacy has to frame itself as black growth. Let me say that again. That white supremacy has to frame itself as black growth, as something organic to the success of the black man and the black woman here in the United States. Criminal, if you will. Just the unwillingness, if you will. And let me jump to this is why you have to have a museum like this. Because you have to document the unwillingness of America to invest in the wellness of the African American people. You have to have a museum that documents the deranged behavior, the barbaric treatment, the lying, the lack of truth, integrity that they put in documents, make you read them if you could read, knowing that it was not applicable to you. And here's the thing that I think is beautiful about this museum. It finally highlights that some of the main drivers for black liberation, black power, black existence, black growth, and involved evolution were black women. That in the double-edged aspects of white supremacy, which is one, white supremacy, but also women living in a patriarchal society, and that patriarchal society lent itself to the black man oppressing the black woman, that our sisters had to jump 2 hurdles. This museum celebrates black women. And they do it in a way that you're never going to see anywhere else. You know, my uncle Reggie, man, I'll be pleased with him. You know, he was a hustler. I love him. He was a hustler. He could sell an air conditioner to ShOUT. He was that good as a salesman. But as a kid, I always remember something that he sold my parents. He sold them a complete library of African American history, from A to Z. Still not in my mama's basement right now. A complete edition of Black American history. And I remember reading that. I'm not talking about a child in the 70s, reading that, going to school, understanding that these people, it's not that they don't want to talk about it. It was worse. They don't know about it. Through elementary school, through junior high school, through college. Even now, I find myself talking about things and people go, what is that about? let me put a bow on this, if you will. I can't believe we're already 50 minutes. I'm sorry. I know we're supposed to be out earlier. But let me put a bow on this. That the Islamic community here in the United States, in specific, here in the United States, needs to understand that the Mecca of African American history and a pathway to your success is at the National Museum of African American History. And let me say this. I was happy to see Muslims who did not look like me in that museum. Sisters in hijabs, Indian, Pakistani, I don't know. But they were there to get the information. I would encourage everybody to make a pilgrimage to this museum. Of course, make a pilgrimage to Mecca, of course. Pilgrimage to this museum. So everybody that's listening, I'm trying to give you some game. I'm trying to give you some science. There are people who are politically, morally, spiritually corrupt, bankrupt, who don't want you to know about this museum. Who don't want that kind of truth. You see, we talked about the truth, the hawk of Eid, that Eid causes things to be stripped down. You know, when you go to Hajj, you're not wearing your favorite fuzzy slippers. You're not wearing your Timberlands. You're not wearing your Gucci and Louis Vuitton. You in bed sheets, man. Thick bed sheets. And because of that, your focus is so much better. This museum puts white supremacy in bed sheets, strips it down. If you get out of the basement, if you will, slavery and freedom, you will, in a metaphysical way, in a spiritual way, understand the tangible aspects of freedom a lot more than you just walking around. Being clear, being connected to struggle, a struggle that's documented. And I want you to understand when you go there, it's easy. It's very easy to come away sad because the people who are in that in those, I want to say in these displays, if you will, the people in these museums, if you will, they can't celebrate themselves like we celebrate ourselves. Here's the thing you should understand. Their struggle is a reminder of how it used to be, but it's also, if you will, a challenge of how it could be. You know, one of my favorite displays was the 70s display. And they talked about arts and culture, Sidney Poitier, Bill Cosby, I Spy, Good Times, Sanford and Son. They talked about all these shows, Flip Wilson. They talked about Tony Brown's Journal. They talked about Soul Train, all these cultural things. But right next to it, they talked about the power movements of the 70s. When I say the power movements of the 70s, I mean the Shirley Chisholms, the Barbara Jordans, the Ron Dellums, the first Congressional Black Caucus picture that was taken. And this is something that is it's something that's unsettling given the political climate we find ourselves in right now. And I say we should celebrate these people, but you have to look at a Shirley Chisholm. These Shirley Chisholm people weren't from here. They were from Guyana and Barbados. But they come in a way where they understand that black excellence is here. You frame who you are as an African American or person of color here in the United States more so than you do anywhere. And the undergirding of this museum lets you know that it started way back. That the challenges started way back. That Africa wasn't perfect, but Africa, damn it, was not America. Some people go, they have slave trade. The Africans had slave trading, but it wasn't a business. It was not a instrument of industry, if you will. That forced labor, see, and I'm trying to find the right words. That forced labor was not the way you got ahead. That if I had 100 acres that needed to be cultivated, I had to do it. But they didn't do that. That these people, even to this day, just the idea, and this is true, some of your larger insurance companies had slave bonds that to this day still pay out. They just put something in the news. They said 100 politicians, and they point out like 100 politicians whose families had connections to slavery. Is it a coincidence that a lot of these folks are not concerned, are not invested in the welfare of African American men and women and children? Nope. And I'm going to say something too, man. This is going to be a little rough. Then I'm going to jump. One thing I did not see in the museum was an argument for LGBTQ+. That somewhere, somehow, someone had the wisdom to say, no, this is an individual, unique, organic struggle that happened way before that. And you are not part of this tradition. Were there gay lobbies? Were there black people that are gay? Sure. But that gay lobby was not a part of driving history. And it's so important to understand that it drives history. You may come along, you may jump on a bus, but you don't drive the bus. And if you don't drive the bus, you need to sit back and support the people who do. So look, I know I went long. Apologize. I'm going to say two things. I'm going to get out of here. First, let me again give a shout out to let's give a shout out to everybody for Eid. Just in the nick of time, Eid is here. Alhamdulillah. The blessings of Eid, you already know. I'm not going to be redundant. I'm just happy to see another one. It's a challenge for me, as you will. I had a pretty tough year, but Allah knows best. And ever merciful, if you will. In my last plea is please go visit this museum. Please support this museum. I don't want to be at an unneeded fundraiser for us to keep this museum going. This is our legacy. This is our truth. This hawk. This is black hawk, black truth. This is a divine connection to how we get from point A to point B without having to, one, explain it, and two, apologize. All right, brothers and sisters, that is it for the show today. You've been amazing. Hope you had a great Eid. Shout out to everybody. And I didn't get shout out to Altaf, shout out to JT, shout out to Mark Kennedy, shout out to Sister Rabina, shout out to Sister Tana, shout out to everybody, Rick, shout out to everybody that comes here on the show, Brother Eric, Bilal, everybody, man. We appreciate it. Brother Adam Khan, much love to you, man. Hope you're doing well. That's our show for today. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. We'll see you next Wednesday, inshallah.